Добрый день всем, или доброе утро, добро пожаловать. Спасибо, что присоединились к Международному фонду избирательных систем, который проводит один из цикла вебинаров, посвященный проведению выборов в условиях пандемии. Это четвертый вебинар. Мы начали такую серию в мае. Они были посвящены разным темам. Тот, что был проведен в мае, был посвящен перспективам органов управления выборами, второй целостности избирательных процессов и третий повышение активного участия молодежи. Меня зовут Magnus Ohman, я работаю в некоммерческой организации Международный фонд избирательных систем. Я являюсь советником, старшим советником IFES по политическому финансированию, также директором регионального офиса IFES в Праге. Мы проводим свою деятельность при поддержке агентства США по международному развитию, также щедрой поддержки американского народа. 1 миллиард людей в мире имеют инвалидность в настоящее время, и IFES поддерживает развитие отношений партнерских с организациями людей с инвалидностью. Мы пытаемся устранить те барьеры, которые не позволяют лицам с ограниченными возможностями участвовать в избирательных процессах в качестве избирателей, сотрудников избирательных комиссий, наблюдателей. К сожалению, пандемия усугубила существующее неравенство, угрожая и здоровью, и демократическим свободам и правам, и ускорение политического исключения многих людей из политической жизни. Данный вебинар посвящен изучению того, как можно улучшить доступ и инклюзию в условиях пандемии. Мы очень рады, что выдающиеся активисты и эксперты присоединились к нам сегодня, чтобы рассказать о своих взглядах на эти возможности, инновации и проблемы, а также то, как международное сообщество может поддержать активное участие людей с ограниченными возможностями в политическом и избирательном процессе.
Inclusion Advisor Virginia Atkinson to explore the context of this issues and to highlight IFES's work in the region and beyond to advance the inclusion of persons with disabilities in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. We will then hear from Seinep Dyikanbaeva, who is Program Manager at the Public Organization of Parents of Children with Disabilities in Kyrgyzstan. She will be followed by Mariam Mikiashvili, who is Deputy Director at the School for the Blind in Tbilisi, in Georgia. After this, we will hear from Yuliia Sachuk, who is Civil Activist and NGO Coordinator for the organization Fight for Rights in Ukraine. And our final speaker will be Gaël Martin-Micallef, who is Legal Advisor at the Venice Commission. Following our panelists, we will open the floor for questions and comments to our speakers. Should you have any questions or comments, please type those in using the chat function in Zoom, and you can do that at any time. Please note that, as Nicoletta mentioned, this webinar is being simultaneously interpreted into 5 voice languages and 6 sign languages. To make that possible, we have asked our panelists to speak slowly, and you will notice me taking pauses at different points to allow our interpreters to catch up. We have also asked our speakers not to use screen share or PowerPoints to make it easier for participants following our webinar through sign language interpretation.
смотрят перевод на
So
язык жестов,
first, I would like to turn
вебинар.
to my colleague Virginia Atkinson
Я
at IFES
хотела бы предоставить
to set
слово
the context
коллеге
for
Вирджинии
today's
Аткинсон,
discussion.
чтобы задать контекст для сегодняшней
Virginia, what would
дискуссии.
you say are the
Вирджиния, что
main
бы вы могли
barriers
сказать,
that people with
каковы
disabilities
основные
face to
барьеры,
participation
с
in political
которыми
life?
сталкиваются люди с ограниченными
Good morning,
возможностями,
Magnus.
с инвалидностью,
Everyone, I'm
участием
looking
в
forward to this
политической жизни?
conversation
Доброе
today.
утро, Магнус. Я с
To
нетерпением
answer your
ожидаю на эту
question, there's quite a
возможность
few
сегодняшней
barriers,
дискуссии сегодня.
unfortunately,
Что
that many
касается
people with
барьеров,
disabilities
достаточно
experience
много
to participation in
барьеров,
political
с
life.
которыми имеют дело
One
люди
of
с
the biggest ones
инвалидностью.
is
Один
actually
из самых
discriminatory legal
больших
frameworks.
– это
So a majority
дискриминационная
of countries around the world
нормативно-правовая база
actually
в
have
большинстве
clauses in their
стран,
election law
в
that say if you're,
законодательстве
quote, of
избирательном
unsound
большинства
mind
стран
or a
мира
myriad of
есть
other
определенные
unsavory
положения
terms,
в
then you are not
законодательстве
allowed to vote or run for office. Many
о том,
election
что
laws also
вы
have
не
clauses that say
можете
something
участвовать,
about if you don't speak
баллотироваться
the
на
native language of the
избирательной
country, for
должности.
example, then you're
Также
not
в
eligible to run
законодательстве
for
других
office.
стран
And in many country
указывается, если
contexts,
вы не
that
владеете
doesn't include the
национальным
native sign language in the country.
языком, вы не
So
можете
these legal
баллотироваться
barriers
на
are really a
избирательной
huge issue
должности.
because it
Речь
doesn't
не
matter
идет
what
о
other steps we
языке
take throughout the
жестов.
electoral
На самом
process to
деле
make it
есть
accessible and
огромные
inclusive,
барьеры.
if
Как мы
there's
можем
this very
сделать
first
политическую
stumbling block with
жизнь
the legal framework.
инклюзивной? Это первый
When we
пункт,
talk about
это
barriers to political
нормативно-правовая
participation, the
база
first thing that
законодательства.
many people
Если
think
мы
of is also
говорим
physical
об
barriers.
участии в
So
политической
access to
жизни, в
polling
избирательных
stations, to
процессах,
political
многие
party
думают о физических
headquarters,
барьерах.
parliaments,
Доступ
and debate venues.
к избирательным
In
участкам,
many countries around
офисам
the world,
партий
even
во
including
многих
here in the
странах во
US,
всем
there was a
мире, даже
recent
в
study that
США.
actually only
Было
about
недавно
40% of
проведено
polling stations
исследование,
here
которое
are
показало,
accessible.
что только
And
40%
the side
избирательных
effect of making
участков
polling stations
доступны для
accessible
людей с
is that many of them are in
инвалидностью,
schools.
и
So
многие
if
находятся
every
в
country around the
школах.
world
Если
was to make all of their polling
каждая
stations
страна во
accessible,
всем
we
мире
would also be making
хотела бы
schools more
сделать
accessible for
избирательные
students and
участки
teachers with
доступными, мы бы
disabilities.
сделали также школы более
Another
доступными
barrier
для
that we see
учителей
is
и
related to
учеников.
inaccessible
Другой
information.
барьер касается
So political party manifestos
доступа
and
к
voter education
информации.
information
Политические
are rarely
манифесты партий,
produced, for
программы
example,
партий
in
на
easy to
самом
read,
деле
or sign language, or Braille, or large font. So it's difficult for people with disabilities to have
в
accurate
текстовом виде, а
information
для
both
людей,
on who to
которые
vote for
используют шрифт
and what the
Брейля,
process of voting is and
или
where they
же
should go.
язык жестов, очень сложно
And then one of the
ознакомиться
last
с
really
этой
large barriers
информацией.
that we
И
see
один из
is related to stigma and discrimination.
барьеров,
So
который
over the
следует
last
упомянуть,
several
это
years, we've
стигма
been seeing a
и
big shift to political
дискриминация.
life moving
Мы
online.
заметили,
And one of the other big side
что
effects of that is unfortunately an increase in hate speech and ableist speech. And when I say ableist speech, I'm referring to
очень
sort of
много
derogatory
происходит
terms
разжигания
that are
вражды
associated with
и близкие
disability being
высказывания.
directed at people with disabilities themselves,
Люди с
or using those terms as an
инвалидностью
insult to someone who doesn't have a disability.
выступают объектом
So there's still a lot more
насмешек
work for
и
us to do to make sure that the political
оскорблений.
process is accessible and
И
inclusive.
мы должны позаботиться о том, что политические
Thank you,
процессы являются
Virginia.
инклюзивными и доступными. Спасибо,
Of
Вирджиния.
course, these issues have hardly been improved with the
Конечно,
current
эти
pandemic.
вопросы
So,
сложно
how is
будет улучшить в
COVID-19
условиях
impacting the
пандемии.
political participation
Как
of persons with disabilities?
ситуация с COVID-19
Yeah, so as I
влияет
just
на
mentioned, the move
участие
online,
людей с
the
инвалидностью в
move of political
политической
life
жизни?
online has
Я
actually been
упомянула,
accelerated
что
because of COVID.
происходит
And the digital
переход
divide
жизни
is
онлайн, но
disproportionately
при этом
impacting many people.
цифровой разрыв или разные
Not all people with
возможности
disabilities have access
существенно
to internet at
влияют
their
на
home, for
доступ
example,
людей с
so they can't
инвалидностью
engage in
к
webinars like this
участию
one,
в политической жизни. Если
or
у
get out
людей
the
нет
vote
доступа к
initiatives that might
интернету,
be
они
on
не
social
могут
media.
участвовать в
Some
вебинаре,
people with
таком как
disabilities might not have
данный
access to
вебинар.
laptops
Также
or
не у
assistive
всех людей с
devices like screen
инвалидностью
readers
есть
that they may have
доступ
had
к
in their offices.
лэптопам или же к
We're also seeing a
скринридерам.
communication
Также
barrier
мы
with the
видим,
personal
что есть
protective equipment, with
коммуникационные
PPE.
барьеры.
With the increased use of face masks, it's making it more difficult for
Если
people
мы
who are deaf or
все
hard of
более
hearing,
используем
because the masks block
маски для
visual
лица
cues,
для
like facial
людей
expressions and
с
lip reading and
нарушениями
emotions.
слуха, сложно
A good point
понять,
there is
что
that we are
говорит
seeing
человек,
some
они не могут
solutions,
читать по
and
губам.
there's been the development of clear
Также
masks, and that helps
есть
with lip reading.
такое развитие в данном
So it's
направлении,
not all bad,
прозрачные маски
and we do have
использовать.
an opportunity to sort of build back better with many of the
Я думаю,
alternative
что есть
measures that are being
возможность
discussed right
создать
now.
еще лучшие
So,
условия.
for example, in many countries around the world because of the pandemic and fears about showing up to vote in person. Countries are exploring online voting or postal voting or advanced voting as a response to the pandemic. And all of these different alternative measures could benefit the disability community if they were made permanent. That said, I do want to stress that these alternative measures don't mean that EMBs or election management bodies don't have to make polling stations accessible anymore, because some people with disabilities would prefer to vote in person, some would prefer to use one of these alternative measures. So there should be options. Some people with disabilities, for example, find absentee voting helpful because it means they don't have to navigate some of the barriers that we discussed earlier, like inaccessible public transportation or waiting in a queue, worrying about the inaccessibility of the polling station, or being concerned that poll workers might question their right to vote when they do get to the polling station. So in the current context, absentee voting also provides a way to safely vote without risking exposure to the virus. And some people with disabilities are immunocompromised or might have a pre-existing health condition, which might put them at an even higher risk from the virus. So avoiding exposure becomes particularly important. In addition to mitigating the risks around the virus, there's also some benefits around independence and privacy for some voters when they vote from home. So they can use their own assistive device, like an adapted keyboard or software such as a screen reader or voice recognition software if they have it, to mark their ballot, which wouldn't be available in the polling station. And this is something that's been discussed quite frequently actually here in the US, for example. There's an estimated 7 million adults that have a visual disability, and advocates here are concerned that some might choose skipping voting altogether rather than risk catching the virus or having their ballot privacy compromised, because, for example, postal voting isn't accessible to people who are blind. So the pandemic has really reinforced an already existing need for accessible voting options.
Okay, so there are quite a lot of challenges, but before we get too discouraged, we need to discuss how we can improve the situation. What are key best practices or lessons learned that we can draw from around the world on political inclusion or persons with disabilities in the pandemic context?
Yeah, so quite a few countries actually have had elections so far, so we do have some good practice examples to draw from. One of those is developing political materials in accessible formats. So, for example, in Bolivia, they had an election recently, and they developed online trainings for their poll workers for the very first time because of the virus. And they included sign language in those videos, so people who are deaf could participate in the poll worker training and then be certified to serve in this leadership position. In Burma, IFES is working with Future Stars, which is a self-advocacy organization comprised of people with intellectual disabilities, and we're working to develop an easy-to-read guide on how to stay safe while participating in political life ahead of their November elections. We're also working with another DPO, Shuemin Foundation, to develop a mobile app that originally had information on COVID-19, and we're now repurposing that app to deliver voter education messages. So putting materials in accessible formats is one good practice that we're seeing that applies in the pandemic and beyond. Something that we're seeing that's very pandemic specific is civil society organizations that are working together to maintain a sense of community and common purpose in lockdown. So, for example, in Kyrgyzstan, we supported a group of young people with and without disabilities to organize Instagram live sessions, which were focused on how to deal with the isolation and the anxiety that's brought on by lockdown, as well as the hygiene measures to prevent the spread of the virus. In Tunisia, we've held a series of webinars with the deaf community to discuss how they've been impacted by the virus and also the government's response to the virus. So the first webinar focused on the social and economic impacts caused by the virus and the government's response. The second was conducted with journalists and focused on the lack of representation of deaf people in the media. And then the next webinar is going to
И на
address
следующем
barriers to and
вебинаре
opportunities
будут
for
рассмотрены
civic
различные
engagement of Dutch.
барьеры и возможности для гражданского участия людей с нарушениями слуха.
Then the third thing is something I think we're all familiar with,
И
and
третье, то,
that's
что
moving
совсем
in-person trainings and advocacy and workshops online.
Мы проводим тренинги
So, for example,
и различные
In
мероприятия
Pakistan,
онлайн. Например, в
IFES had been planning to
Пакистане
do an in-person training with a group of women with
IFES планировал
disabilities
проводить
on how to advocate
личный
with the government on
тренинг,
public policy reform.
офлайн тренинг.
So this was planned right before the lockdowns all
Это
started
было
happening.
запланировано
We
перед
sort of
началом
very quickly had to adapt and
карантина,
move it to an
и
online
далее
context.
мы адаптировались и перевели тренинг
So what we did
в
first
онлайн
is conduct a survey
формат.
with all of the participants.
Что мы сделали вначале, это
See, they
провели
even have
опрос
access to internet at home
чтобы
to do an
определить,
online
есть ли у
training.
них доступ к интернету
And if
дома,
so,
чтобы
how
участвовать в
long could they
таком
participate in an online
онлайн-тренинге.
training? You know, what type of technology
Также,
do they have at home?
какое оборудование
You know,
у них есть,
laptop
или
versus a
технология,
phone.
это ноутбук или
That might
телефон,
influence the types of activities
так
that we
как
could
это
do
может
on the online
повлиять на
training.
вид упражнений, которые
And we
мы
also
используем
asked
при
about reasonable
проведении
accommodations that they
онлайн-тренинга.
might
И также,
require
какое
in order to participate in an online
разумное
training.
приспособление необходимо
Because the
для
answer to that
этого.
question is going to be different than when we had been planning to
Вопросы
do it in
будут,
person.
ответы на данные вопросы будут отличаться, а мы, соответственно, будем по-разному реагировать.
So the survey results indicated
Результаты
that most
опроса
people actually had access
показали,
to a
что
smartphone, but not a
большинство
laptop.
людей имели
And
смартфоны,
they
но
had
не
access to a separate
лэптопы.
room or a
У
quiet space
них
for only a limited
был
amount of
доступ
time
к
each day.
отдельной комнате только
So
в
we needed to adjust
ограниченные
how many hours a
часы.
day the
И
training
мы
was going to
должны
be
были
if we were
определить,
switching
сколько
it to an
часов в
online
день они
implementation.
могут провести в уединении.
We also learned that a majority of the
Также мы
respondents had actually never
обнаружили, что
participated in an online
большинство
training.
респондентов никогда не
So
участвовали в
we did a training on how
онлайн-тренингах.
to use Zoom
Поэтому мы
before we
провели
did the
тренинг
training.
вначале, как использовать Zoom перед проведением тренинга.
And then in addition to
И
updating the
кроме
delivery methods,
этого,
we also updated the content.
мы обновили
So the curriculum now
контент.
focuses on building
Программа
participants' capacity to identify
тренингов
government bodies in charge of the
IFES
COVID response
касательно
and to identify the current,
определения
COVID response
государственных органов,
policies
которые
and any
отвечают за
gaps related
реагирование
to
на
disability
COVID
inclusion in those
и
policies.
разработку политики,
And then also
как
we updated the curriculum to include more
реагировать
focus
на
on
COVID.
virtual
Мы
advocacy techniques
определили
so that everyone
нашу
could make sure
программу
that they're
таким
focusing
образом,
on
чтобы
remaining
она
safe
больше была
while they're staying
ориентирована
at
на
home during the pandemic.
виртуальные адвокационные усилия.
So those are three areas
Это
that we're
три
seeing good practices
направления, где
emerge
мы
in
увидели
terms of materials in
возникновение
accessible
передовых
formats,
практик,
maintaining a sense of community and
материалы в
common
удобном,
purpose,
доступном формате,
and then tailoring trainings
и
and
также
workshops
адаптация
from
тренингов и
in-person to
семинаров из
online.
офлайн формата на онлайн формат.
Thank you very much, Virginia.
Спасибо большое,
We'll take a
Вирджиния.
brief pause to allow our
Мы
interpreters to catch
небольшую
up.
паузу сделаем, чтобы переводчики перевели.
So these are examples of things that
Это примеры
are
тех
being
вещей,
done.
которые
What are the
делаются.
challenges that are not being adequately addressed
Какие еще
at the
есть
moment, or not being
вызовы
addressed
у
at all?
нас,
Virginia?
что не решается должным образом?
So there's some challenges that were around
Есть
pre-pandemic that have just been exacerbated now. And
определенные
then there's
вызовы,
also some
если они были
challenges
актуальны
that are
до
entirely
пандемии,
new and are
сейчас
brought
они
on by the pandemic.
усугубились. А некоторые вызовы только
Two
пандемия
things
принесла
that have
в
been
нашу
exacerbated
жизнь.
by the pandemic
Те, что
are,
усугубились во время
one is the
пандемии,
need for more awareness raising and training for
это
political actors.
необходимость повышать знания
So for election
людей
management bodies,
в
political
различных
parties,
сферах, например,
election
органы
observers,
администрирования выборов,
all of the
политические
actors across the entire
партии
electoral cycle
и также различные
on the unique
участники
barriers to
избирательных
political
процессов.
participation
Их
that are
необходимо
encountered by people with
ознакомить с
disabilities.
уникальными барьерами для участия в политической жизни, которые возникают
A second barrier that was
у людей с
around
инвалидностью. Второй
pre-pandemic and has just been
барьер, то,
exacerbated
что
is stigma and
касается
discrimination.
стигмы и
And that is
дискриминации.
really the root of
И
many of the
это
other
является
barriers that we've been
причиной очень
discussing today.
многих других барьеров, которые
And a
мы
good
будем
solution for that
обсуждать
we're starting to
сегодня.
see is an
Хорошее
increased
решение
focus on
данного
civic education.
вопроса – это
And so that
повышение
helps to prevent
внимания к гражданскому
stereotypes, from
образованию,
developing in
чтобы
the first place.
стереотипы не формировались прежде всего.
Then there's two things that we're seeing that are really
Есть
brought on
две
by the
вещи,
pandemic in particular.
которые возникли в связи с пандемией.
One of those is that IFES is noticing disabled persons organizations and other civil society groups need more support on crisis management and psychosocial support. So many advocates were already working long hours. They might have already been putting their lives at risk in some cases, advocating for democracy and inclusion in their country. And now they have the additional stressors that are brought on by the pandemic. And then the second thing we're seeing that's new because of COVID is the sort of shifting funding landscape. So understandably, many donors and international development actors have been prioritizing health programs, but there isn't necessarily always the link being made there that quality health responses depend on a participatory and well-functioning government.
Необходимо, чтобы
So we shouldn't forget the importance of democracy and governance work to effective COVID responses.
Демократия также важна и в этом аспекте.
And many of our civil society partners and GPOs are seeing the work that they were doing on democracy and governance being sort of shifted and that funding taken away to health programs. So, once this immediate impact of the pandemic is over, we could see secondary impacts related to the situation on democracy and governance in these countries. So those are some of the challenges that were somewhere around pre-pandemic and some that are new.
Были и до пандемии, некоторые новые.
Thank you very much, Virginia.
Спасибо большое, Вирджиния.
We will now hear from our panelists on how they are working to mitigate the barriers to political exclusion. And first up, before I hand over to our first panelist, Seinep Dyikanbaeva, we're going to take another short break to allow our interpreters to catch up.
Dyikanbaeva, мы предоставим перерыв для того, чтобы переводчики перевели.
And at this point, we ask those of you who are following this webinar through American Sign Language to switch to the other interpreter. And you do this by selecting Gallery View, finding the ASL Interpreter 2, you will see her being active on the video screen. Right-click on her video and
кликнуть правой кнопкой мышки, и вы увидите перевод.
So, first up is Seinep Dyikanbaeva, who is from the Public Organization of Parents of Children with Disabilities in Kyrgyzstan. Please, Seinep, the floor is yours.
В Кыргызстане, пожалуйста, вам слово, Seinep.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to participate.
Спасибо за возможность участвовать в данном
More
вебинаре.
than 169,000 people
Во-первых,
left Kyrgyzstan, and more than 3 million people participating in
в Киргизстане свыше 186 тысяч людей с инвалидностью, около 30 тысяч из них дети.
How many people with disabilities participated in the vote process, and we just to include this the information into following elect process, and we gave this recommendation.
Мы определили, и, к сожалению, отсутствует информация инвалидов. У нас был опыт, когда люди с инвалидностью
about election of people with disabilities.
Не имеют возможности голосовать.
Who could come
Люди
by themselves and get a vote. However, I want to share
Я хотела бы поделиться с вами моим опытом, как я голосовала. Я приходила на избирательные участки и голосовала, как все другие люди. Однако я провела эксперимент однажды, как это голосовать на дому, потому что до этого у нас раньше была такая практика, что люди старшего возраста голосовали на дому, и люди с инвалидностью к ним приходили представители избирательной комиссии с бюллетенями и урной для голосования.
Nothing better than voting in the public place where everybody voted. Therefore, that's very important that people with disability voted in the polling place that
Однако это лишало людей чувства радости от голосования на избирательном участке вместе с другими людьми. Спасибо, IFES, за то, что вы работаете вместе с партнером избирательной комиссии в Кыргызстане, чтобы обеспечить, что люди с инвалидностью могут теперь быть и кандидатами. Также у нас большой прогресс в данном вопросе.
That allow people with disabilities to apply the states of valuing a same condition of
проводится работа по созданию условий для людей с инвалидностью на уровне законодательства.
That's very important because now we have a developing policy on people with disabilities in voting process, and now also people with disabilities start to participate in the process such as candidate for the election process. Two persons with disabilities from each parties. Now we have 17 parties. They become a candidate. Before, it was only one deputy in the parliament who became a parliament member. That's a very huge progress in our country. And also, I wanted to say that people with disabilities in Kyrgyzstan, they also become a very active participating in the observation process, in the monitoring process. And the IFES also doing the pre and monitoring and post-monitoring process of election. How it now is going on. For instance, now 65% of the voting place are accessible. However, we have a vision like if we install a ramp, this is an accessibility. However, it's not enough. Therefore, we just recommend the state to create all conditions for equality, that people with disabilities could vote as everyone else. And also people with disabilities hired to the election commission, and they are now work to the whole staff. That's also very good progress in this area. However, rather than we have this progress, we have several problems. As I said, there's no general statistics that will be available publicly. How many people participating in the voting process? How many people give their votes? It will be very good to have the statistics by the gender basis. There is also, we don't have full the completely accessibility. We don't have a polling station that will be full accessible. There's also people with disability who still voted and give their votes at home place.
Люди, которые голосуют дома, очень много случаев таких, все еще голосуют дома. Нам необходимо продолжать работу над этим, и поэтому у меня есть рекомендации такие: продолжать улучшать систематически избирательный процесс и предоставить право голоса для каждого, и продолжать изменения и заботиться о людях с инвалидностью, и развивать техническую
and to
сторону,
create a reasonable accommodation for people
создавать
with disabilities for
разумное
each
приспособление для
category,
людей с
and
инвалидностью различных категорий
that will be
инвалидности.
very important.
Это будет очень
And
важно.
also continually
Также
to work on the legislative
продолжать
basis,
работать над
and also to train
законодательством
people with
и над
disabilities and the
обучением
other
людей с
interested body that
инвалидностью и других
included into the
заинтересованных лиц, обучать
election process. However, I
касательно
wanted to
их
say thank you to
участия в
IFES in
избирательном
Kyrgyzstan.
процессе. Я
They
хотела бы
work with
поблагодарить IFES
OCC and
Кыргызстан
trained already in cooperation with the
касательно
Central Election
тренингов,
Commission,
которые вы проводите.
how to
Центральная избирательная
communicate people
комиссия
with
также
people with disabilities,
получает
how to work with
рекомендации
people with
касательно того, как
disabilities,
коммуницировать с людьми с
and
инвалидностью, как
that's very
работать с людьми с
important.
инвалидностью. Это
And
очень
finally, I
важно.
wanted to
И в
say
конце концов
that
я хотела бы сказать, что
that never we have to be
мы
satisfied that
никогда не
we have
можем быть
full
довольны,
realization of
что
people
у
with
нас
disabilities
есть...
in every area,
Мы никогда, наверное,
that
не можем
every
достичь той
right of people with
ситуации, что
disabilities fully
люди с
accomplished.
инвалидностью получат
The same is
полное
for right
удовлетворение
to
своих
voting.
потребностей и
Therefore, we
обеспечение
just
своих прав.
keeping
Одно
forward.
из
Thank you very much
них —
for
это право
opportunity to talk to
голосовать. И
you
спасибо
and to
большое за
present the
возможность поговорить с
situation in
вами
my
сегодня
country.
и
Thank you very
представить
much.
ситуацию в
And if
моей
you have a
стране.
question, I
Спасибо
will be
большое.
very
Если у
glad
вас есть
to
вопросы, буду очень
respond
рада на них
on them.
ответить.
Thank you.
Спасибо.
Thank you very much, Seinep. We'll take a very
Спасибо.
brief pause to allow our hard-working interpreters to catch up.
I'm sorry that I didn't keep the pause. I'm so sorry.
Not at all. Not at all. That's on me. Okay. I next then hand the word to Mariam Mikiashvili from the School for the Blind in Georgia. Mariam, please.
I didn't hear. Sorry, I didn't hear.
Sorry. Thank you, Seinep. We are just moving on to the next speaker, Mariam Mikiashvili. Thank you.
Спасибо, мы переходим к другому панелисту.
Hello, may I begin?
Добрый день, могу
Yes,
ли я
please, Mariam.
начинать? Да, пожалуйста.
Hello, everyone. I'm from Georgia, and
Я
I'd
из
like to talk
Грузии.
about the election
Я
process
хотела бы
from the
поговорить
Georgian
в
perspective
избирательном
mostly,
процессе с
and
точки зрения грузинской перспективы и грузинского
regarding the
видения.
situation that we have in the country right now during the pandemic. But I
У
would like
нас
to start
такая
with
же
the
ситуация,
history,
как и во всех странах,
which
пандемия. Я
actually
хотела бы
starts our
начать с
election
истории
history starts
вопроса. Наша
from
избирательная история
1918,
начинается с
when we had first
1918 года, когда у нас были
but during these elections,
когда у
women
нас
and men
были
were equally able to vote. And also in the first Georgian parliament, there were
первый
women
грузинский
and also women
парламент также
with a minority,
имел
ethnic
женщин-депутатов и
minority backgrounds
представителей
represented.
меньшинств.
But not women or men with disabilities at that point.
Но не люди,
Then
мужчины или
later on,
женщины с
and also
инвалидностью.
at that time,
И
and also
также
still until now,
и
all
с тех
persons with
пор до
disabilities are
настоящего
able
времени
and allowed to vote.
все
But,
люди с инвалидностью имеют
but
возможность
the
голосовать.
person with disabilities excluding
Но,
person with psychosocial or
но это
intellectual
исключает
disability.
людей с
Because those with
с
psychosocial and intellectual
интеллектуальной
disabilities
инвалидностью или
were considered
психосоциальной
not to be
инвалидностью. Такие люди не рассматривались как
not to have the right to
избиратели.
to until 2015 around where we had a reform in that sense, and also a person
люди
with
с
intellectual and
интеллектуальной
social
инвалидностью не имели возможности голосовать.
Okay, we may have an issue with
Возможно, есть
Mariam's
вопросы с интернет-подключением у Мариам.
The pandemic.
Right. Okay. Mariam, if you can hear
Мариам,
us, I think
если
there's
вы
an
можете
issue with your
слышать,
internet
у вас
connection,
есть
so
проблема с
I will ask
интернет-подключением.
that
Я попрошу,
we will move on to
чтобы
the
мы
next
перешли
speaker.
к следующему
Mariam,
докладчику.
I think we cannot
Мариам,
hear you very
мы
well
не
right now.
слышим вас.
Can you try again?
Oh, okay. Can you hear me now?
Сейчас
Now it works
слышно?
Can you hear me now?
Да, сейчас.
Yes, we can. Thank
Сейчас
you.
мы
Okay.
слышим.
So during this pandemic period,
Во
we're going
время
to have
пандемии
elections at the end of October, and
выборы
there will be
запланированы на
extra challenges because
конец
the
октября.
polling
Это
stations
будет
will
огромный
be the
вызов.
same. We do not have
Избирательные
any
участки
electronic
же, у нас
voting
нет
system
электронной
or
системы
any other
голосования
kind of voting
или же
system,
любой другой
for example,
системы
through post service,
голосования.
etc.
По
People have
почте
to
люди
go
должны
in person to
физически
the
идти на
polling
избирательные
stations and
участки и
vote.
голосовать.
But this would bring
Но
extra
дополнительным
barriers for persons who
препятствием
are
для
deaf or
людей
hard of
с
hearing because they will have to
нарушениями
use the masks, and
слуха
everyone
состоит в том,
will
что
have to
люди
use the
используют
masks. Those who
маски,
enter the
и
polling
те, кто
stations, and
приходят на
also the members of
избирательные
the election
участки, и
commission
также члены избирательной комиссии,
who guide the process.
которые руководят этим
So
процессом.
this will be an extra barrier. Also, it is quite
должно быть
hard and
интерпретировано
create
как
certain
дополнительный барьер
barriers
для
and
людей
maybe
с
risks.
нарушениями
We
слуха
can
и,
say it so
возможно,
for blind
риски.
persons or visually impaired
Мы
persons
должны
because
сказать, что есть риски для
mostly the
людей с
polling stations
нарушениями
are at
зрения, потому
schools or
что
at the
большинство избирательных
kindergartens or at
участков
the
находятся в
buildings which are
школах
quite old and
и
they are
в
not
детских
physically
садах. Это
accessible.
довольно старые
And
здания, они не
persons
имеют
who are
физической
visually impaired,
доступности.
totally
Люди с
blind, for example, or
нарушениями
partially sighted, they would require
зрения,
sighted guides,
им необходимы
which means like extra
ассистенты, которые
contact, extra
сопровождали бы их, и это означает дополнительный контакт,
hand-to-hand contact, so to say, and
рука,
this
чтобы взяли за
holds
руку, и
extra
это
risks
несет в
for
себе
virus
дополнительный риск
spreading the virus.
распространения вируса.
So this is a general kind of
Это
general
общий
difficulty that
общая
we have in Georgia in
проблемная
terms of
ситуация, то, что у нас есть в Грузии, в том, что касается
generally, like during this pandemic, because
во
many
время
places are not accessible
пандемии.
and blind people often have to
Большинство
use a sighted guide or ask
мест не имеют архитектурной доступности.
for help. Just a stranger, this really carries
Просить постороннего
quite a
человека о
big risk.
помощи, на самом деле это несет в себе
And this
довольно
also
большой
applies
риск, и
to the
также
election
это
process.
касается
Regarding the
избирательного
accessibility of the
процесса.
polling
Что
stations
касается доступности
and
избирательных
the
участков
election process,
и избирательного процесса,
through the recent years, there has
в
been done
последние
quite a lot
годы
in
было
terms of ballot
достаточно
accessibility.
много
For example, for blind and partially sighted, they're accessible kind of
для
ballot
того, чтобы
frames where you
бюллетень
place a
стал
ballot and
доступным.
you have the
Рамки
appropriate
специальные были
numbers on this
разработаны.
frame in braille
В этой
and in
рамке
tactile
шрифтом
format, and then
Брайля
you can
были номера определенные. Вы
the
можете
number you wish by yourself. This is not restricted.
маркировать тот номер, который вы
So this was a
желаете,
very
не
big
было
step
ограничений.
forward
Это был
during the
большой
recent
существенный
years
шаг
that we have.
вперед за последние годы.
However,
Однако,
inaccessibility of the polling stations is still a
распространение
problem,
доступности
and
избирательных участков это все
also
еще
that the
проблема,
awareness of persons with disabilities
также
is quite low,
также уровень
and
сознания
especially
людей
during
с
this pandemic
инвалидностью
when
довольно
people are
низкий,
not so
особенно в
willing and
условиях
eager
пандемии.
to go
Люди
out
не
and
так
to
готовы
go
идти
to the
на
places
улицу,
where it's quite
куда-то
crowded
переходить,
and
где много
there is a higher
людей,
risk of
где
spreading the
большой риск
virus.
распространения
We
вируса.
need quite a big work to
Необходимо предпринять
direct toward the persons with
большие
disabilities for
усилия,
them
чтобы
to
люди с
really become
инвалидностью
active and vote,
стали
and
действительно активными
that
и
it's important,
голосовали.
that
И
it's
это важно,
their voice
что
or their
их
vote
голос
really matters,
на самом деле
and
имеет значение.
this is a quite huge work,
Это очень большая
which
работа,
so
которая
far has
должна быть
not really been
проведена,
done
которая на самом деле не
in
была еще
such
до
a
сих
way that
пор
it's directed to
проведена
the
таким
persons
образом,
with
чтобы
disabilities. Of course,
она
general
направляла людей с
awareness-raising
инвалидностью.
campaigns are going
Конечно,
on, but
кампании повышения
nothing that is
уровня
directed to the
информирования
persons with
происходят,
disabilities. And
проводятся,
also,
однако они не
in
направлены
terms of
на людей
information
с инвалидностью с
accessibility,
точки зрения доступности
all
информации.
the videos or advertisement that's made regarding the elections. The election commission usually tries to make them accessible for deaf, and they put captions or sign language interpretation to the videos, but none of them have, for example, audio description for blind, which of course makes it less accessible for blind users.
Проблему для людей с нарушениями зрения.
Well, this is also beyond the pandemic. It's the same difficulty, but during this pandemic period, certain challenges have been added to what was before. In terms of running for the elections, we do not have any restrictions in that sense. Everyone can basically run and be elected, also persons with disabilities, and we have a couple of cases, not too many, but a couple of cases through years when persons with disabilities were elected in the parliament. But this is very much also connected with the awareness of the society, because very often such persons are always those who have mobility impairments and not other types of disabilities, so to say. And it's quite obvious in Georgian case, but this is not due to the law, it's just due to the awareness. And also all of them are males. We do not have any females with disabilities who have ever been elected in the parliament, for example, or of course not the president either. Yeah, this is, I think, the general overview I wanted to share with you, and if there are any questions or comments, I would be happy to answer them.
Thank you very much, Mariam. Thank you for your presentation, and we are looking forward to having the first woman parliamentarian with a disability in Georgia. We are looking forward to have many more women with disabilities as heads of state all over the world. So let's hope for that to come. I am about to hand over to Yuliia Sachuk from the organization Fight for Right in Ukraine. But before doing that, we again ask that those of you following the webinar using American Sign Language, go to Gallery View, find the sign language interpreter who is interpreting, which will be interpreter 1, and right-click on her video feed, pin the video to follow the American Sign Language interpretation.
Чтобы дальше воспринимать вебинар в переводе от переводчика 1.
Please, Yuliia.
Пожалуйста, Юлия.
You are muted still.
Юлия, включите микрофон.
Are you hearing me?
Можете ли вы меня слышать?
Yes, we can.
Да.
Okay, thank you, Marcus. Thank you, colleagues. I will try to highlight the issues that my colleagues didn't mention, but I also like to start about overall situation with political and electoral participation of people with disabilities, and make special stress on women with disabilities political participation. We have in our parliament the first member of parliament with woman with disability, and it's a great win for us, and we are proud of this. And also after new members of Central Election Commission of Ukraine were elected in 2019, the process of
developing new electoral code of Ukraine became more active. Positively, that President Zelensky personally paid special attention to the issue of accessibility and inclusiveness during the new electoral code development. And by means of IFES Ukraine consultants and experts, people with disabilities were involved to the drafting of the code. And now we have a new electoral code which contains a range of different important provisions regarding, for example, accessibility of polling station, because code explicitly obliges the local authorities to secure the accessibility of the polling station for voters with disabilities and with low mobility. Also about accessibility of electoral information, especially obligation of media to provide different electoral information with sign language interpretations or and captions. Also about positive thing is about procedural simplification. The new code simplifies communication with the state register of voters, and it makes possible to submit different or to inclusion in the register and correct the errors online, which is very useful for people with different kinds with disabilities. However, the newly adopted electoral code of Ukraine still envisages provisions preventing people deprived of legal capacity from voting and standing for elections in Ukraine. Those 30,000 of people with intellectual and psychosocial disabilities are excluded from the electoral process in the country. Also, the code doesn't envisage the secret and personal voting procedure for people with visual disability. Moreover, the newly adopted design of the ballot for October 25th local elections prevent voters with low vision from voting. Also, the code doesn't contain mandatory provisions to secure information accessibility to all information published within the election process. And the important thing that we have that the range of duty barriers is not clearly defined in the code. But at the same time, the positive things that I can highlight that we are very thankful for Central Election Commission that together with IFES Ukraine initiated in December 2019 special Central Election Commission working group on accessibility and people with disability rights. It's a huge step forward, and it gives opportunity to work more systematically and provide our opinion and expertise over many issues. One of the results of our joint work is the new provision which will be used during October elections, and it's more regarding architectural accessibility, and the provision clearly defines all criteria of architectural accessibility of polling stations, and with accordance to the state building regulations and best international practices. Local elections, which we will have in October 25th,
25th, it's also a challenge for Ukraine and for voters with disabilities. And but positive thing that Central Election Commission initiated and created special working group on elections during coronavirus pandemic, and they recommended, for example, to have also face masks, to they limit number of voters on the polling station at the same time, and also recommend to have to voters to have their own pen for voting, but at the same time there are no any recommendations regarding voters with disabilities, and as a civil society, together with IFES Ukraine, we will take this issue, and in the framework of our project Team Up for Accessible Elections, we will establish a special chat board in Telegram and inform voters with different kinds of disabilities about best practices, about the security, about their possibility to vote and to make this more comfortable for them. Also, we can mention that interest of voters with disabilities to go to the polling station is became more lower. That's why we also start big informational campaigns. We will product 4 video clips about voting in the condition of pandemic, and for 4 different types of groups of voters with disabilities, with intellectual and psychosocial disability, who are blind, who are deaf, and with physical disabilities, and we will cooperate with national TV, and because many people with disabilities use this channel of communication and share information about possibility to vote and about the importance to vote on the polling station, because we are expected that most of voters who have a special who have the special mark on state register of voters as a voter with disability stay to vote at home. Also, we continue to work on electoral and political participation of women and girls with disabilities, and because as an organization of people with disabilities, co-founders of it mostly are women and girls with disabilities is our priority, and in 2018 we conduct special survey at the boarding school between young boys and girls with disabilities, and we receive results that show us that only that with the same interest in politics from boys and girls with disabilities, the number of boys who are ready to be active in politics is 70%, but through girls with disabilities this number is only 30%. That's why we start
Also, Ukraine doesn't
Также в Украине
Ukraine also doesn't collect disaggregated data on gender, age, types of disability, and it's also a problem. And that's why we started. It was for us one of the reasons to start School of Political Leadership for Women and Girls with Disabilities, supported by IFES. And in 2019, we organized first school, and more than 20 girls and women, young women with different types of disability from all over Ukraine were trained, and graduates had the opportunity to have internship in central state authority bodies, for example, Office of Vice Prime Minister on European Integration, Ukraine Cultural Foundation, also Social Policy Committee of Ukrainian Parliament, Central Election Commission, and now we are proud that one of our graduates who is blind, thanks to the knowledge and contacts gained during the school, she got a job as a teacher, and now she's also she became a candidate for the during local elections for the Kyiv Regional Council, and it's our big thing to be proud. Also during the development of shadow report to UN regarding CRPD implementation, together with Kyiv International Institute of Sociology, we conduct Survive on Disability Rights situation in Ukraine, and we have a range of questions about political participation of people with disabilities, and since it will be the first national representative survive on disability, we will be able to receive the quality of data to analyze and to take action forward to improve the situation, to advocate, and to be active in this sphere. Regarding additional barriers, I could mention thought that our woman candidate shared with me that it concerns about to organize meetings with voters offline, but at the other hand, she thinks that it's a great privilege to invite more wider audience to attend online meeting.
Сейчас, которую мы имеем, привлекать гораздо более широкую аудиторию к таким встречам онлайн. И я думаю, что один из больших вызовов, который стоит перед нами, это то, что люди с инвалидностью, избиратели с инвалидностью в Украине не получают достаточно информации шаг за шагом касательно того, как они могут голосовать в таких условиях пандемии. Я думаю, что главные вещи. Спасибо большое всем за поддержку, и мы ждем. Спасибо за внимание. Я ожидаю.
Thank you very much, Yuliia. Thank you for that. I am about to hand over to our last speaker, Gaël Martin-Micallef. Before doing that, we'll take a brief pause to allow our interpreters to catch up.
Перед этим я сделаю небольшую паузу, чтобы переводчики закончили перевод.
Gaël, please, the floor is yours.
Пожалуйста, слово вам.
Thank you very much, Magnus. Hello, everyone.
Magnus. Добрый день всем.
I will start with a very brief anecdote. I was part of the first signatories of the Bill of Electoral Rights for Citizens with Disabilities, which was signed in September 2002, so far before the UN Convention, in Sigtuna, Sweden. At that time, there was, among other colleagues and who became friends, Richard Sudriet, the former president of IFES, among other colleagues. So this is a topic on which I'm particularly dedicated since for a long time. I will not go into many different existing instruments because I guess all participants to this webinar are aware of the existing texts. And I will refer to the UN Convention on the rights of people with disabilities, and especially the Article 29, without again going into details. We issued in 2002 at the Venice Commission of the Council of Europe the Code of Good Practice in Electoral Matters, where we, let's say, tried at that time to express the right for, let's say, based on the principle of universal suffrage, to allow any eligible citizen to vote and to stand for elections. But at that time, we were not into the latest developments regarding the rights of citizens with disabilities in terms of participating in public affairs. And we, let's say, in this very initial text, limited such political rights to the possibility by an individual judicial decision to be banned from voting and or standing for elections. Of course, in the meantime, there were many issues and many developments with regard to the right of people with disabilities, and we issued an interpretative declaration of our own text, allowing, first of all, taking into account the UN Convention and allowing, let's say, recommending member states of the Venice Commission, which means larger beyond the Council of Europe's membership, to allow any citizen with disabilities not only to vote but also to stand for elections. Are you aware of the case law of the European Court of Human Rights in this regard, and especially KIS versus Hungary from May 2010? Now, coming back to the question of the participation of citizens with disabilities in elections during, I will not limit to pandemic, but during an emergency situation, which means that it could occur not only during, let's say, a period of pandemic, but also a period of natural disaster, for instance. So the challenge is how to adapt the existing rule, or how to let's say, invite our lawmakers to improve the existing electoral legal framework to take into account the particular situation of citizens with disabilities during such particular periods of pandemics, natural disaster, whatever the situation, what we would call, let's say, emergency situations. And in this respect, not specifically on persons with disabilities, I just inform you that we issued with the Venice Commission in June 2020 a report on respect for democracy, human rights, and rule of law during states of emergency. So we developed this report with reflections, especially with a section dedicated on elections under states of emergency. Now, what could be the impact of such elections held under states of emergency, especially on electoral rights of citizens with disabilities? Well, my personal considerations would be first not to, or let's say, the effort to avoid any blanket restrictions on any category of citizens. To take into account the proportionality when decisions, especially restrictions or legitimate restrictions on fundamental rights, to the situation of different categories of citizens, including citizens with disability.
Различная категория граждан, включая граждан с инвалидностью.
The fundamental rights, to the right of expression, the right
свобода
of
выражения взглядов, свобода проведения собраний, это все то, что касается выборов и права на свободный выбор. Это мой первое замечание. Возможно, следует принять во внимание важность пропорциональности потенциальных законов.
There is also another issue I was thinking about, the campaign, the electoral campaign. Of course, we will go back to the voting operations, but there is, first of all, in the pre-electoral period, the issue of the campaign and how, for instance, to adapt campaign costs, but also from the side of the political parties, but also the public authorities. It's also how to adapt the campaigning material, especially in a period where the accessibility would be more complicated.
Когда доступность усложнилась, более усложнена.
I was also thinking regarding the voting operations,
the
possibility to, let's say, develop alternative means of voting. I'm cautious with this issue because I'm not sure that it would respond to the situation of every type, of every category of citizen with disabilities. I was thinking of proxy voting or voting by mail. It already exists, of course. But how to extend, how to make these means of voting more liberal, more easier, let's say easier for different categories of citizens. Sorry for the terminology category, by the way, but it's to simplify the debate and to make it faster. Regarding the voting operations, there probably room for improvement, especially when it's about the sanitary measures. So I would go back to the specific situation of the pandemic. I observed the elections in Poland in June and July, the presidential election. I could see long queues because a very high turnout, which is welcome, of course, but then we can question the particular situation of citizens with disabilities in such very long days, queuing and physical accessibility to the voting centers, most of them being schools in many countries. There is probably now a responsibility of lawmakers of our states to adapt the existing rules for anticipating maybe similar situations in the future, both pandemic or natural disaster or any other emergency situations. I did not go into detail, and I will not go into detail on this issue of emergency situations. It's the expression which covers both states of emergency when it's covered by constitutional provisions, and the emergency situations where countries did not go through their constitutional provisions despite recognizing a situation of emergency. So I think some questions could be raised with regard to these periods of emergency, and again, anticipating future situations, hopefully not pandemic, but any kind of situation may appear, also with the climate change and the natural disasters. So again, I think we have now to learn lessons from the last month, especially the electoral cycles which took place during this pandemic, to adapt probably the electoral legal framework of our respective countries. Thank you very much.
Спасибо большое.
Thank you very much, Gaël.
Спасибо большое, Gaël.
One last time, we ask those of you following this webinar through American Sign Language to go back to gallery view and switch to ASL interpreter 2, who will be coming online very soon. And we will now continue with questions from you. If you do have a question, please type it into the chat box, which you will see at the bottom of your screen. While you are typing in your questions, we will hear a brief comment from the head of the Union of the Deaf, in Georgia, Mr. Mariam Batatunashvili. Please bear with us, because he will make his brief statement in Georgian Sign Language, which will be interpreted into spoken Georgian, which will be interpreted into English, and I will then repeat it back so that it can be interpreted into all spoken and sign languages. Please, Mr. Mariam Batatunashvili.
Я это повторю. Пожалуйста, слово вам предоставляем.
Начала?
Включение.
Can we ask our Georgian Sign Language interpreter to switch her audio channel to English? Otherwise, we cannot hear her, I'm afraid.
На грузинский язык жестов переключиться на другой канал, потому что мы не можем услышать.
I'm afraid we cannot get this to work at this point in time, so while we're working on it, I have received some questions
Пока мы работаем
that I
над
would like to
улучшением
ask
данного
to our
вопроса, я
panelists.
получил несколько вопросов, которые я хотел бы
Very important
переадресовать
question is
нашим
that
панелистам.
elections
Очень
are
важный вопрос
approaching
состоит в
in
том, что
Kyrgyzstan, in
в
Georgia,
Киргизстане,
and
в
in
Грузии
Ukraine.
и в Украине
What
приближаются
tips or
выборы.
lessons
какие уроки мы можем извлечь касательно увеличения инклюзии и доступности? Вы могли бы предоставить для людей, занимающихся адвокационной деятельностью в этом направлении для других стран? Возможно, Юлия хотела бы ответить на данный вопрос. А возможно, Мариам?
Sorry, can you repeat, please?
Можете ли вы повторить, пожалуйста,
So the question is, what tips or lessons that you have learned on increasing access in relation to elections
какие
that you would
выводы вы
give
сделали
for
и
advocates
рекомендации,
in
которые вы
other
можете
countries?
предоставить организациям, защищающим права людей с инвалидностью в других странах касательно увеличения доступности? Я могу сказать, что самая позитивная вещь – это создание особой рабочей группы.
And the force of this group is that it contains as members of Central Election Commission
рабочей группы, которая состоит из членов Центральной избирательной комиссии, людей с инвалидностью, представителей IFES Украина и других организаций гражданского общества и экспертов. Это предоставило нам возможность проработать шаг за шагом документ, в котором изложены различные аспекты этого вопроса касательно нахождения способов путем проведения фокус-групп или же с помощью привлечения различных аудиторий с тем, чтобы мы могли выработать политику в сфере выборов касательно доступности, то, что релевантно в условиях нашей страны. И мы на самом деле видим четкие результаты всех наших усилий.
Thank you very much, Yuliia.
Спасибо большое, Юлия.
Mariam or Seinep, would either of you want to address the same issue?
Mariam или Seinep, хотите ли вы прокомментировать?
IFES also developed the working group, and now they, as I said, doing the pre-monitoring process,
которая занимается мониторингом процесса, чтобы обеспечить, что все хорошо. Люди с нарушениями зрения, с нарушениями слуха также имеют доступ к избирательному процессу. Как коллеги упомянули, мы также подготовили видео.
Also in sign languages.
И обеспечили перевод материалов программ партии на язык жестов. Это очень хороший шаг вперед. В том, что касается разработки IT-технологий в сфере избирательных процессов, в условиях пандемии мы должны разработать опцию электронного голосования. Как я упомянула раньше, это не очень хорошая практика голосовать на дому, однако в условиях пандемии это поможет сберечь жизни людей. И последние годы, 14 марта, IFES и другая международная организация, также организация людей с инвалидностью, активно участвовали в этом процессе. Мы надеемся, что мы смогли определить все пробелы, проблемные вопросы, которые потребуют решения. Возможно, рано говорить о том, как это все будет, так как у нас в октябре будут выборы, и мы можем только после выборов извлечь уроки из этого.
Thank you very much,
Спасибо большое, Мариам, вы желаете ответить на тот же вопрос?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Да, вы слышите меня?
So maybe I will not say anything new, but the
Возможно,
most
я не скажу
important is the information
ничего
accessibility
нового, однако
for all
наиболее важна
persons,
доступность
because
информации
they
для
need to have
всех людей,
quality
так как для
information about the
людей
candidates,
важно
about their
иметь
programs, about
качественную
the
информацию
procedures of
в том, что
elections.
касается
And this is the most
кандидатов,
important, I think, the
процедур
web
на
page
выборах.
accessibility, as well
Это
as
очень
the
важно.
TV advertisement accessibility is very important.
Телевизионная реклама,
And
ее
also
доступность,
when
это
there are the
очень
meetings of
важно.
the political
Когда
candidates to
проводятся встречи политических
the
кандидатов
communities,
с
they often have the flyers or
они
booklets,
часто
and these
раздают
should be made
буклеты
accessible,
или
for example, for
листовки,
blind.
но
They
они
should be
должны
offered in
быть
alternative formats
доступными и
so that everybody
предложенными
can
в
have equal
доступных
access to
форматах,
them.
чтобы у
And
всех
also
был
the
равный
accessibility of
доступ
polling
к
stations,
этой
which is, I think, the
информации, а также доступность
maybe challenge.
избирательных
This is a
участков,
very
что
big challenge
составляло
because it's
проблему.
Please go on, Mariam.
Да, пожалуйста,
So this is
продолжайте,
not easy
Мариам.
to do because
Это не
these
так
polling stations do
легко.
not belong to the election commission. They are usually rented or borrowed from other government
Потому
bodies.
что, возможно,
But this is very important because if we want
это очень
to
важно,
accomplish
если мы
high
хотим достичь
voting rates
высокой
among
явки
persons with disabilities, we have to have
избирателей
accessible polling stations
среди
and accessible ballots
избирателей
and
с
accessible
инвалидностью, мы
information.
должны
So
обеспечить, что
this is like
избирательные
all
участки
together that
доступны, и все
we have
это
to reach the high number of
важно
voters,
для
of persons
нас,
with
чтобы мы
disabilities.
обеспечили высокую явку людей среди людей,
Thank you very much,
избирателей с
Mariam.
инвалидностью. Спасибо
I
большое, Мариам.
have received one question
У
for
меня
Virginia and
один
one from Gaël
вопрос
from the
для
Venice Commission. If we
Вирджинии
start
и
with
один
Gaël,
для Gaël из
how
Венецианской комиссии.
can
Я предлагаю начать с
disabled
Gaël.
persons
Как
organizations
организации
best provide
людей с
feedback to the Venice
инвалидностью
Commission
могут
on election access issues?
предоставить отзывы Венецианской комиссии касательно
I can be
доступа к
the contact
избирательному
person,
процессу.
the focal
Это
point of
я не
such
могу быть
questions or information. It's always useful for the Venice Commission to get
что касается
such
контактного лица
feedback, such
касательно
experience,
этой
especially because
информации.
on a regular basis,
Важно
we accompany the Parliamentary
получить
Assembly of the Council
информацию
of Europe to
официально.
observe a
Мы
number of
часто
elections.
работаем вместе
And
с
time to
Советом
time,
Европы
we
над
are able
наблюдением за
also to observe
выборами. И иногда
the question of accessibility of
мы
citizens
проводим
with
специальное
disabilities
наблюдение за
to
доступностью
elections. But of
избирательных
course, it is
участков и
limited to
выборов.
the voting day and to the
Конечно,
voting
это все
operations.
связано
So it can be
с
interesting as
тем,
well to
когда
have
дата выборов и какие
information, reports,
избирательные
feedback on the
операции.
pre-electoral
Однако нам очень интересно
steps of any
получать
electoral process. For
информацию,
instance, the
отчеты и
campaigns,
отзывы
the campaign
касательно
survey,
среды
the access
до
to information,
выборов,
the media coverage,
агитация,
and
доступ к
all the
информации,
issues that could be
освещение выборов в
quite
СМИ.
challenging for
Это может быть
people with disabilities.
достаточно сложным для людей с
I can leave
инвалидностью
you
получать
my
всю эту информацию.
email address
Я
in the
могу
chat, for
дать
instance.
мой электронный адрес в чате,
That would
например.
be excellent. Thank you very
Это
much,
было
Gaël.
бы
And we also have a
прекрасно.
comment from
Спасибо.
Gordana Rajko from
У
Serbia.
нас
I
есть
will not read
комментарий
that
с
out
Гордана
for
Райко из
time reasons,
Сербии.
but that also has
По
information. The
причине
entire chat readout will
времени
be available afterwards.
мы не можем все вопросы
Thank you, Gaël.
озвучить, и
Before
позже
we
вы сможете
move
получить
to the
доступ
last
к
question for
тексту
Virginia,
всего
should we
чата.
try once
Перед
again
тем, как мы
to hear
перейдем
the
к
comment
вопросу,
from
который
Amiram
адресован
Batatunashvili? I
Вирджинии,
think
можем
we
ли
have
мы
sorted
попытаться
out
еще раз
the
попросить выступить коллегу из Грузии? Мне кажется, мы решили эту проблему.
Tarjimas ვთხოვ, რომ ქართულად ვისაუბრებ და თარგმნოს. ხო, არის ტექნიკურად, კი ბატონო. ძალიან საინტერესო დისკუსია, დიდი მადლობა მინდა გადაგიხადოთ ამ თემის წინ წამოწევისთვის. მნიშვნელოვანია ერთ-ერთი საკითხი. თქვენ ალბათ იცით, რომ გუშინ 23 სექტემბრიდან ერთი კვირის განმავლობაში არის საერთაშორისო ჟესტური ენების დღე აღინიშნება და გილოცავთ ამ ჟესტური ენების საერთაშორისო დღეს გილოცავთ. რაც შეეხება საარჩევნო პროცესებს და არსებულ ბარიერებს და გამოწვევებს, თქვენ ყველა სათითაოდ შეეხეთ თქვენ ქვეყანაში არსებულ საარჩევნო პროცესებს, რაც შრეშმო პირებთან არის დაკავშირებული, კი? უდაოდ გეთანხმებით, რომ ყველა ქვეყანაში არსებობს რაღაც პრობლემა. ერთ-ერთი მნიშვნელოვანი პრობლემა, რაც სმენდაქვეთებული ადამიანებისთვის არის, ეს არის ინფორმაციაზე ხელმისაწვდომობის პრობლემა. არის ინფორმაციის ნაკლებობა ამ ადამიანებისთვის. სმენდაქვედებულ ადამიანებს არ აქვთ იმის შესაძლებლობა, რომ აირჩიონ რომელიმე პარტია. რეალურად მათი გეგმები, სამომავლო ინიციატივები ამ გეგმის მოსმენის საშუალება არ გააჩნიათ მათ, რადგან თითქმის გარდა სარეკლამო ინფორმაციებისა, სხვა კონფერენციების, სხვა შეხვედრები არ ითარგმნება ჟესტურ ენაზე. ჩვენთან საქართველოში პარლამენტის მესამე მოსმენით დამტკიცდა ძალიან ბევრი ბრძოლის შედეგად, დამტკიცდა ჟესტური ენა და იქნა აღიარებული ენად და იმედი მაქვს, რომ სამომავლოდ ძალიან ბევრ კარგ ნაბიჯს გადასგავს სახელმწიფო ამ ადამიანებისთვის. დიდი ბრძოლის შედეგად ჩვენ მივახციეთ იმას, რომ საზოგადოებრივ მაუწყებელს ჰქონოდა საინფორმაციო გადაცემები ჟესტურ ენაზე ნათარგმნი, თუმცა სხვადასხვა ვებინარები თუ მსგავსი საინფორმაციო საშუალებები არ არის ნათარგმნი ჟესტურ ენაზე. სხვადასხვა სმენდაქვეთებული ადამიანებისთვის. სრულყოფილი ინფორმაციის მიწოდება სწორედ არის გარანტი იმისა, რომ მათ სწორი არჩევანი გააკეთონ და სწორი მონაწილეობა მიიღონ სახელმწიფოს დემოკრატიული შენების პროცესში. და მხოლოდ უბრალოდ სამწუხარო ფაქტი ის არის, რომ ამაზე მუშაობის შედეგად მხოლოდ ამ წელს დაიწყო აქტუალური მუშაობა ამ თემის შესახებ. და მიხარია, რომ ნელ-ნელა იდგმება ნაბიჯები ზუსტად თანასწორუფლებიან გარემოს შესაქმნელად ამ ადამიანებისთვის. და არა მარტო სმენდაქვეთებული ადამიანებისთვის, არამედ მთლიანად შეზღუდული სიტუაციების მქონე ადამიანებისთვის. მადლობა.
Thank you very much, Mr. Batatonishvili, and thank you very much to our Georgian Sign Language interpreter and our Georgian voice interpreter. I will very briefly summarize what was being said because that would not have been available to anyone listening in a language other than Georgian or English. So Mr. Batatonishvili said how this was a very interesting discussion and
о том, что это очень интересная дискуссия, очень важная тема.
The International Sign Language Day.
Также недавно мы отмечали Международный день переводчика на язык жестов. Для людей с нарушениями слуха главный вопрос – это доступ к информации в политическом избирательном контексте. Очень часто информация не предоставляется в доступном формате, включая также в Грузии. Язык жестов должен быть признанным языком в грузинском контексте, и фактически это означает, что многие вебинары недоступны на языке жестов, в отличие от данного. Как упомянул коллега из Грузии, работа в данном направлении в Грузии продолжается. Спасибо большое за ваши комментарии. Я хочу переадресовать последний вопрос.
If you could identify just one thing that
Если
election
вы
management
можете
bodies can do to make
могли бы
elections
определить
successful,
одну
what
вещь,
would that be?
которую орган администрирования выборов может сделать, чтобы
If
сделать
I only get
выборы
one,
успешными.
then
Только
the
одну
number
вещь,
one
да?
thing I would say that election management bodies
Тогда
can do
я бы
is
сказала,
to consult
это
with DPOs, consult with people with disabilities.
это
So
консультироваться
reach out
с
to the
людьми
different
с
disabled persons
инвалидностью,
organizations in your country
связаться с
and ask
различными
them what
организациями по
solutions would work
защите прав
best in your
людей
country
с инвалидностью и спросить у них, какие решения, по их мнению, лучше всего бы сработали.
Thank you very much,
Спасибо
Virginia.
большое,
We
Вирджиния.
are approaching the end of our
Мы
time together.
подходим к
I
концу
want to
нашего
conclude the
вебинара.
webinar by
Я хотел бы
thanking all of our
завершить вебинар,
panelists
поблагодарив
for your
всех
presentations and
наших
your
докладчиков
insights,
за ваши
all of our
презентации,
participants for
ваши
being with us
мысли, ваши выводы. Спасибо всем за этот чрезвычайно интересный вебинар. Агентство США по международному развитию поддерживает наш вебинар. Спасибо большое всем переводчикам на национальные языки и на языки жестов. Я не знаю, сколько вебинаров имели перевод на 11 языков синхронно. Спасибо большое команда IFES, которая работала очень напряженно, чтобы подготовить данный вебинар. Следующий вебинар, дата и тема будет озвучена скоро, и мы будем рады пригласить вас на следующий вебинар. И до тех пор оставайтесь в безопасности.